r/AskReddit. What unsolved mystery has absolutely no plausible explanation? So, my mom's dad died when she was 2. My grandmom never remarried or dated, so my mom grew up without a father figure in her life. It really affected her in a way that's really hard to describe and still does to this day. She talks about it a lot and tends to be very dependent and fragile. I think because my grandmom raised her very sheltered. My mom kind of has this obsession with her dad and is constantly asking my grandmom and other relatives about him and what he was like, which is understandable but still sad. He died a long time ago, 50+ years, so she only has a handful of pictures of him, which she really cherishes, all black and white. One of these few pictures was a small, black and white picture of him sitting on a porch with his mom, aka my mom's grandmother, or my great-grandmother. In the picture, they were seated about 5 feet apart from each other, each on one side of the picture. The picture itself was in a small frame, on the dining room, on top of this weird desk/cabinet thing. It was on a shelf pretty high up, 5.5 feet off the ground, and recessed by about 2 feet, because of the desk. I note this to emphasize that it wasn't like on an end table or something, it wasn't easily accessed. Behind it in the frame was a baby picture of my brother. You know how people will put a picture in a frame over another one, but for whatever reason leave the previous one in there, behind it? Anyways, one day, on my way home from work, I got a call from my mom. She was really quiet and distressed and asked me, "Hey, did you do that to my picture?" I had absolutely no idea what the fuck she was talking about, so I said so. We moved on, hung up, and I drove home. When I got there, I asked her what she'd been referring to, and she showed me the picture. Holy shit. Someone had cut out her dad and his mom and placed them side by side together in the frame. It was done very sloppily, and the rest of the picture was gone. The picture of my brother was nowhere to be found. We looked through the trash for the pictures, my brother, and the rest of the pic of her dad, and they weren't there. It was really bizarre. And they weren't like lovingly cut out. When I say sloppy, just imagine when you were a little kid and had to cut something small out pretty fast, so you basically just got the general shape and that was enough. I mean, a section of the man's head was lopped off. After investigating and asking questions, this is the information we have. It wasn't me, unless I just randomly got completely blackout one night, retained the motor skills to do something like that, and for some reason covered my tracks. According to my mom, it wasn't her. According to him, it wasn't my brother. It wasn't my mom's fiancé. Additional info, the 4 of us are the only ones with unrestricted access to the house, that is have keys. Only my brother and I ever drink. My mom occasionally has a glass of wine or something, but she's really tiny and medicated, so she gets trashed if she drinks any more than that. My mom and dad both think it was one of my friends from when we pre-gamed at the house one night, but A, I asked everyone it could have been, in a completely neutral way, and they were all baffled. B, none of them were ever alone long enough to do that, let alone find scissors, pick out a picture, SDSSDZCM1 that is so clearly important, nice frame, black and white, not immediately recognizable people to non-family, and do the deed, without being noticed. C, the sloppy cutting, and the way all the evidence was disposed to Sam makes it seem malicious, but they were slid closer together, so someone, presumably, knew they were related. None of my friends would have. D, none of my friends would have fucking done that because it's rude, presumptuous, and weird as fuck, and we're all in our mid-20s. E, we pre-gamed at the house once over break. One time. And, it was a pre-game, there's no way anyone got drunk enough to accidentally fuck that up. Or, like I said, was alone long enough to do that. Actually just recently something really odd happened to me. I have a good friend, let's call her Jill. Jill and I have known each other for 20 years, since childhood. Our families know each other. She was over at my place, I was over at hers, etc. So I know her pretty well. I even know about her friends I have never met, but that she's talked about, etc. So 2 months ago Jill tells me her brother is getting married, and I know her brothers. She has 2, let's call them Jim and Tom. Jim is the oldest, so I said congrats, who is Jim getting married to? She's like, it's not Jim. Now Tom is too young, around 13. So I was super confused. And she's like, let's call him John. John. I was like, WTF, since when? Does she have another brother? I laughed rather awkwardly and said, how old is John again? She said he _21. I have never heard of him before though. But I thought, wow, I'm such a dense idiot, it must be my memory playing a trick or something. Here's where it gets weird. I told my mum about the wedding. She had the exact reaction as me. She's known the family even longer than me, and my mum is a teacher. Jill used to be her student. Mum doesn't remember John but at all. I found that super odd, but at this point I'm still blaming my own and mum memory. So I ask my best friend, let's call her Ellie, who grew up as a next door neighbor to Jill. Both were born there and never moved out of their homes, so they see each other quite often on the street etc, and that for almost 30 years now. Ellie has the memory of an elephant. She remembers every little unnecessary person and detail in our lives. She even remembers substitute teachers we had 15 years ago for just one lesson. Frankly, I don't at all. I told her too. Hey Jill, brother John is getting married. Silence. Then she says, John. Do you mean Jim? And I'm like, no, I mean John. And then she says, listen Gwennick Jones, Jill only has 2 brothers and her other brother Tom is a kid. You must be mixing something up. I had to show her a screenshot from a WhatsApp chat between me and Jill to prove I wasn't bullshitting her until Ellie believed me. She was super upset. So I guess the mystery is, how did John pop up out of nowhere to be the middle child in Jill family that nobody remembers? Sorry for the long read. TLDR. Childhood friend has a brother that nobody remembers. Edit. I have also met Jim and Tom both at Jill's place and randomly on the street etc, but I have no clue what John even looks like XD. Edit 2. Update. Not sure if anyone still cares, but here is an update. We had to postpone the initial dinner plans we had because Jill's grandmother passed away. So we met today instead. So Jill and I went out for dinner today, and being socially awkward as I'm about keeping things from my friends, I blurted out that I needed to tell her something the minute I saw her. I told her I don't remember her brother John. She is like, what do you mean? You mean you forgot what he looks like? Me, no, I literally don't remember him ever existing until you told me he got engaged. Please don't be mad. She starts laughing her ass off and can't stop for a good 10 minutes. And then she says, you did act a bit odd when I told you about the engagement, but I thought you were just tired or something. Me, the thing is mum and Ellie don't remember him either. She laughs some more and says, man, this happens to him all the time. Apart from my family and my best friends, she has a close friend circle of about 4 people who are her besties. Everybody seems to forget John. People keep on saying I have 2 brothers or are super surprised when I tell them about John. She did show me photos of them together, photos of the engagement party, and family photos on her phone with him on. But at this point she is also taking the piss out of me because I feel like actual shit for absolutely forgetting poor John. I can honestly say though, I have never seen him before. He does look similar to her older brother a tiny little bit, but apart from that he doesn't look like anyone. But then again she looks even less like any of them, so IDK. Then we tried to figure out why that may be the case. Guys, I asked her everything you suggested, but she said it is her brother by the same father and mother, and he was like 9 when we were going in and out of each other's houses as teens, and he never lived abroad or stayed in hospital for long or anything. People just seem to forget him. Before we said goodbye I couldn't hold it in any longer and told her I posted whole thing here. She is not on Reddit though, and she started to laugh her ass off again. I would now say it is the middle child syndrome, which I find super sad. From now on I will always remember people's middle children / siblings and forget the first and last borns to make up for my memory crime. I was working at a summer camp in Maine. Had done the drive back home to NH more than a few times. Took about 3 hours as it was over 120 miles away. Technically a bit shorter, but it's New England. Roads twist and wind like crazy. So, I call my parents a little after 9 and tell them I'll be leaving soon, get my stuff, and head to the car, pulling out perhaps 10 minutes later. Everything's going fine at first, but then I notice my GPS flicker and die. I hadn't taken the highway for fear of Friday night traffic, and I'm mostly passing through small towns with no real directional signs. A minute or two later, I figure out the plug in my car isn't working, and thus my GPS hadn't been charging. Oh well, I think I'll just use my phone's GPS. I'm in the backwoods. My phone isn't getting a signal. So, now utterly panicked, I just keep driving on this road winding through the trees. It's paved, but there's nothing out there. A few turns off into dark woods with no buildings, but no towns, and not a soul in sight. I occasionally pass an old dilapidated house or a couple abandoned looking gas stations that seemed decades old, but the only time I see lights was when I passed this strange building sitting at the end of a long driveway. It had floor to ceiling glass windows, and I could see inside what looked like a country club or ballroom, perhaps a car showroom, with no furniture or anything I could really make out inside. All the lights were on, though, illuminating the empty field surrounding it, and the rows of silent cars parked out front. Something about it terrified little 16-year-old me, and I kept driving. I was going about 70 to 80 right now, as fast as I felt safe driving on the slowly winding road, almost hoping a cop would pull me over, so I could ask for help. Just as I was starting to actually freak out, I see lights up ahead on the right, and turn onto the little dirt road that appears out of the tree line. I turn onto the road, figuring I can probably find a gas station or something to stop at. Takes me a minute to recognize one of the buildings and to realize I'm about 3 minutes drive from home, just across the lake. I drive across the bridge, pull into the driveway, and walk inside. As I do, my parents come downstairs, looking confused. After a few confused comments, they say they thought I had left around 9, and I say I did. At which point, I look over at the clock, and realize it's just past 10:30. My GPS had died around 10:30 to 45 minutes into my drive. TL. Doctor, I somehow managed to get home impossibly fast, on a road I was never able to locate again, and to this day I can't figure out how, as I know I wasn't going 95 miles per hour the whole way home. This is gonna sound absolutely nuts. This is a personal mystery of mine that has always kind of perplexed me. When I was little, maybe 6 or so, my grandpa bought one of those cheap plastic snakes. You know the kind? It is coiled up, and the bottom of the snake is like black and hollowed out. Anyways, he bought this snake, and told me that, if I was ever being bad, and doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing, this snake would come to life and bite me. I remember kind of rolling my eyes, and going about my day, because of course toys never came to life, and hurt you for being bad. So some time passes, and one day I'm sitting in our sunroom playing, when I decide to write my teacher a letter, but couldn't find a pen or crayon, so I decided to use my aunt's nail polish. This was a big no-no, but I was pretty much left to my own devices, so I didn't care. I remember about halfway through writing the letter I look up and notice that plastic snake coiled up a foot or so in front of me. This was weird, because I hadn't seen that snake in forever and definitely hadn't been playing with it. I picked it up and threw it further away from me, remembering my grandpa's warning that it would come to life and bite me if I was being bad. Yeah, no, like I was currently being. I remember taking note of where it landed, because this thing creeped me out. I go back to my letter and promptly forget about it. A few minutes later I hear an odd noise that I couldn't place, and saw some movement out of the corner of my eye. Where I had thrown this cheap plastic snake was now a very real and alive snake. I flipped my shit and climbed a bookcase in the room, screaming for someone to come help me. My mom rushed into the room just in time to see the snake slither out of sight. She got my grandpa and my uncles and they hunted for this snake for what seemed like hours, while I stayed perched on the bookcase. They finally find it, take it outside, and promptly kill it. The weird part, besides that it was in the exact spot I threw that plastic snake, was after that day I never saw that plastic snake toy again. It just straight up vanished. I'm sure there may be a reasonable explanation. Hell, I was young and kids are kind of known for their vivid imaginations. But it has always kind of unsettled me. How much of a coincidence is it that this snake just happened to get in our house that day, just happened to be in the spot I threw that snake, and out of all the rooms in the house, managed to coil up right in front of where I was being bad? My wife was born under complicated legal circumstances. That is a distracting side story, but the only reason I mentioned this is because she had her original birth certificate and was told keep this safe. You will never be able to get a duplicate. So we kept it in a safe. One day, it disappeared. We are not sure how or why, but it was gone. The safe is the size of an office box. It's not big, and we gleaned through every piece of paper. No one had access to the safe, but my wife and I had the only key on my keychain. Well, we needed it for her to get a passport in 1995. So she called the records place of the state of Kentucky and found out that she could not get a duplicate because they had no record of her birth and the original hospital records had been destroyed. I forget why, but there was either a bureaucratic issue with the closing of the hospital due to a county dispute who actually owned the property, or the hospital burned down, or both. Lots of phone calls. She called her mom, and her mom said, "I told you not to lose it." She called the Social Security office, but they couldn't help. Despite having a valid Social Security card and driver's license, she was realizing she was becoming an unperson. Every place she called pointed to another place. Phone numbers she was given either went to the wrong office, were disconnected, or nobody answered. The majority of this clusterfuck was definitely the fault of Kentucky state offices, who were staffed by incompetent, uncaring, and overworked personnel at the time. She had case numbers, but there was no central authority to link them together. Months and months went by where she was often put on hold for hours, and then hung up on. Then, one day, I was getting something out of the safe, and there was not only her birth certificate with a folder of papers, but two of them. Not a photocopy, but the real certificate and all. Two embossed and notarized documents on copy-proof paper, with the county seal, dated on her birthday in 1970. Two identical originals. We never figured that one out. I suspected a vortex or wormhole to a parallel universe opened up in that safe, took her birth certificate, and then returned it later. But an error occurred where the birth certificate from that parallel universe also ended up in that folder. So now there was a parallel universe married couple who were now missing the birth certificate. Just so weird. The case of a racist barber. I moved to a new area and needed a haircut. Went on Google, found a barber, easy peasy. It was in an L-shaped strip mall. Barber was an old man, and during conversation I mentioned that I was a veteran, and he said he was a veteran too. At first, I was enjoying the conversation, because veterans can have a lot to talk about across generations, but this conversation quickly devolved into racist nonsense. We are both white. His stories were anti-black. I didn't call him out on this, just resolved that I would never go back to this barber again. Haircut ends, and I go to pay with my debit card. He can't take cards, but says I can go to the bank at the other end of the strip mall. So I do. For whatever reason, I don't bother going inside the bank, and I don't want to get in my car, because I don't want the barber to think I'm driving off without paying, so I just walk through the bank drive-through ATM and get the cash. I start walking back to the barber, but I hear a voice behind me. It's a teenager, waving my ATM card. Apparently I left it in the machine. I thank him, take the card back, pay the barber, and leave. Sometime later, I need another haircut. I go on Google to find a new barber again, but despite the fact the racist guy used to be the first result, there's no longer a listing for him. I figure he retired, or died, or maybe his racism put him out of business, and I don't give it another thought at the time. It's not a mystery, at least, not an interesting one. Small businesses in strip malls come and go, but shortly thereafter, I drive by where the strip mall was, and it's gone. The entire mall. It's all gone now, just an overgrown field. No hint that anything else used to be there at all. No hint that the land is for sale or any other indication of what might have happened. This has been a full strip mall just 2 to 3 months earlier, and the barber never mentioned in our chat that he expected this to happen. The attached bank had been part of a major chain. They don't usually disappear. Could the strip mall have gone out of business? Sure. But then who would pay to tear down the building? If the building did have to come down, then why did someone also take the trouble of turning the paved parking lot into an overgrown grass field? The most obvious answer, of course, is that I'm simply wrong about where the strip mall was located. I admit, this almost has to be the answer. However, a few points to consider. 1. The strip mall had a strange layout, unlike any I'd seen before. This was due to the strange parcel of land the strip mall was built on, parcel that perfectly matched this now grass lot. 2. The whole thing became a bit of a, I don't know if earworm is the right phrase here, but the more I thought about this, the more that didn't add up. So I became very interested in solving this, and the most obvious way to solve it would be to simply find where the strip mall actually was. But I explored the area by car and by Google Maps repeatedly. Although I knew I hadn't driven far when I found it the first time, I expanded my search. Once, after I posted about this online, someone seized on the racist part and found a Yelp review accusing a barber of racism in my area. And yes, the barber was next to a bank on Google Maps. This was more than an hour from my home, but the rest seemingly all fit. Aha. Case closed. But when I dropped into Street View, it wasn't a strip mall at all. The barber was in an entirely separate building from the bank. Absolutely nothing matched at all. 3. This could easily just be my brain playing tricks, now that I consider it to be a mystery at all. But suddenly the whole thing has a roll to me feel to it, when I look back. Someone being blatantly racist in a place of business, an inability to pay by ATM card, even the teen who found my card and gave it to me suddenly feels like Richie Cunningham Happy Days in my memory. Do I believe I actually somehow time traveled to an era where that strip mall existed? Of course not. I'm a rational person, not prone to believing things like that. But I've spent years trying to find a rational explanation and have never managed to do so. Edit. This done gone. Went and blew up. Every time I finish reading the replies, there are dozens more. To answer the most common, get your bank records. This is probably the best answer, but it was 8 years ago, so I don't know the day or month. 2. I don't believe you. Okay, this is the truth, but I don't have anything to gain by begging you to believe it. 3. You were dreaming. My hairs were indeed cut. 4. Go to the town hall / ask neighbors. I do realize now that asking the businesses nearby about the strip mall likely would have resolved things at the time. If it was raised, they'd know about it. If they didn't know what I was talking about, well, I guess I'd be right back where I started. But I have long since moved away, and even if I returned, was there a strip mall here about 10 years ago would not be as productive a question as was there one here 2 weeks ago. 5. Just Google bank locations in that area and use Google Maps / Street View to find it. Already did that. Came up empty. 6. Use Google Maps History View. I didn't know this was a thing. Looking into it. Update. Though I could not remember my own address from when this story takes place, much less the address of a random lot, I was able to remember enough landmarks to find it again on Google Maps. I moved away a long time ago, but according to Google Maps Street View, the overgrown lot has now become a paved parking lot for a new outpatient clinic for a major hospital chain in the area. The actual clinic was built next door to the lot from my story. So, perhaps that's where the story ends. Maybe the mall was purchased and raised for a hospital that was built 8 years later. I happened to work in PR for a different hospital chain, and building a clinic takes about 1 year, not 8, but it's certainly more plausible than time travel. I couldn't find a way to do the Google Map History View thing on my phone, but for anyone who wants to play along at home, here's the address to the hospital. The mall from my memory was located next door, in what is now the hospital's parking lot. 4490 Mount Royal Boulevard, Allison Park, Pennsylvania. TL. Doctor, sister's alarm clock picked up a radio signal with no AM/FM features. Thought it could just be a case of wandering signal, but was able to turn it off by pressing a random button not designed for that function. That coupled with the device not being built to channel a radio signal in the first place causes head scratching confusion. Another personal mystery, only ever happened once, which makes it a bit odd for me and harder to explain away logically like I usually would in this type of situation. In my childhood home at around the age of 16, I was going through the motions of getting ready for school before going downstairs to eat breakfast one morning. As I was putting on my school uniform, I heard music coming from my sister's room. Being the only one upstairs, and knowing that no one else was likely to come up again, I quickly finished dressing and walked in there to turn it off. Upon entering, I made a beeline for her digital alarm clock, as the radio morning commute music was most definitely originating from there. I had never had much to do with her alarm clock, so I spent about half a minute looking for the button to tell it that my sister was an idiot for leaving her snooze on, and that we were all awake now. I couldn't find it, so I picked it up to get a better look from different angles. I distinctly remember the music warping as I turned the device over in my hands. Eventually I gave up looking and started to just press random buttons, successfully turning off the music. I promptly went downstairs and told my sister what I'd done and that she should probably have a look at it later, because I had no idea what I'd pressed in my impatience. She was sat at the table drinking a cup of tea, and my mum was also there, standing in the doorway of the kitchen. As I'd been talking, my sister hadn't said anything, which is unusual, believe me, and as I neared the end of my recount, she'd developed a puzzled expression. I noticed my mum also looked confused. My sister then informed me that her alarm clock didn't have a radio. What? She assured me it only had an alert tone. I still have no concrete explanation for this. We are not a radio family, so there actually wasn't one in the house. I surmised there could have been radio waves or a radio nearby that was somehow channeled through my sister's alarm clock. We used to live in a very rural area, however, with neighbors far away on one side, no local station emitting a signal, and farmland for miles on the other side. Even if a picked up signal was the case, the biggest issue I have with making that explanation plausible is how was I able to turn it off by pressing buttons not available for that particular function. I distinctly remember it immediately stopping upon my pressing of a certain button. Why would my pressing a button have any influence on radio waves that were stubbornly being broadcast through this particular device not designed for that anyway? Was it all a coincidence? I was so freaked out by it all that I refused to talk about for the rest of the day. When I got home from school though, I immediately examined the alarm clock, because I became convinced my sister was messing with me. No built-in radio. Never picked up a signal again. Personal mystery. My dog was old, 17, and she got out the back gate one morning when my dad let her out to pee. I was around 27 to 28 at the time. I came over to my dad's house when my brother called me and told me she had gotten out early that morning and they couldn't find her. Here is a little backstory. I found her in Baltimore in the blizzard of '96. I brought her home, pleased with my mother, and she gave me the old "it's up to your father. He can home," and I asked if we could keep her. He said no, so she became our family pet. We did put up lost dog flyers, but we received no response. The vet aged her at around 9 months. She was a collie/whippet mix, and she was the sweetest creature you'd ever meet. And she knew how to open the back gate and would escape regularly. She would do her escape act at least once a week. We would chase her for 10 minutes until she decided she was ready to come home, and she would stop and let us catch her. She would even sometime escape without us knowing, but she knew her home and would later be out front on the porch scratching at the front door. She had even gotten out once and was gone for 5 days. She came back to the front door, pregnant. The little hooch. She became the best mama though. Near the end, she hadn't escaped out back for a long time, 6 months to a year maybe. She had a brief bout with seizures a year before. We changed her food/diet and they subsided. Flashback to that morning. I got the call that she got out and they couldn't find her. My dad wakes up between 5 to 6 every morning to start his day. His story was that he let her out back, the gate was open, and she took off. My theory is, he came downstairs and found her unresponsive and took care of her himself to spare the family's feelings of losing their beloved pet of almost 2 decades. It would be easier to cope with her getting out and us never finding her than to deal with the heartbreak right then and there that she was gone. I got the phone call around 8:30. I came right over. We looked for hours. We drove everywhere. We scoured miles and miles. We went down every side street. We parked and walked, calling out her name. We never found her. We would kind of look everywhere we went for the next couple weeks. The pain of losing her was lessened over those weeks. We put up flyers to no avail. So either she did get out and never came back, or my dad